I've been a forest ranger for most of my life, now retired. My name is Stanley. For 30 years, I've carried a story inside me like a stone in my gut. A secret I never put in an official report, never told my wife, never even whispered to my own reflection in the mirror. Some things you see don't fit into the world we think we know. Telling them gives them a power they shouldn't have outside the deep woods. But I'm an old man now, and the silence is heavier than the stone ever was. I have to let it out. Maybe it's a confession. Maybe I'm just trying to convince myself I'm not crazy before I go. It happened in the fall of '88. I was a young ranger then, not yet 30, full of confidence and convinced I knew every sound and shadow in the Cascade Mountains. I was on a solo 4-day patrol, checking remote trail markers in a section of the park so dense and rugged that most hikers avoided it. It was just me and my German Shepherd, Buddy. He was a great dog, brave and smart, more partner than pet. The first day was normal. The air was crisp, smelling of pine needles and damp earth. The silence of the old-growth forest was a comfort, a thick blanket broken only by the chatter of a squirrel or the call of a raven. But on the second afternoon, things started to feel wrong. It began with Buddy. We were walking along a ridge when he suddenly stopped dead, the fur on his neck standing straight up. He let out a low, soft whine, a sound I'd never heard him make. It wasn't aggression, it was fear. I scanned the trees, my hand resting on the small pistol on my hip. "What is it, boy? Bear?" I whispered, but his eyes weren't fixed on any one spot. They were wide, darting everywhere, as if the threat was the forest itself. Then I smelled it. It wasn't a skunk, and it wasn't the smell of a dead animal. It was heavy, musky, like wet fur and something else, something deeply unclean and wild. It clung to the air, making the back of my throat itch. I told myself it was just a strange wind, a trick of the mountain air, but I knew I was lying. A few hundred yards later, we heard the sound. It wasn't a roar or a growl. It was a deep, guttural sound, more of a vibration than a noise. I felt it in my chest, in the soles of my boots. It sounded like something immense was clearing its throat, a sound that seemed to come from the very ground beneath us. Buddy pressed against my leg, trembling. That's when my own confidence started to crack. I'd heard cougars scream and bears huff. This was none of those. This was something ancient. We kept moving, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. It was a physical pressure on the back of my neck. Every snapped twig, every rustle of leaves, made me jump. The sun began to dip below the peaks, casting long, distorted shadows that played tricks on my eyes. I decided to make camp early, in a small clearing with a good view. I built a large fire, more for courage than for warmth. That night, I barely slept. Buddy stayed awake, his head up, ears twitching at every sound from the darkness beyond the firelight. Twice I heard something heavy moving in the trees just out of sight. Not the light steps of a deer or the lumbering walk of a bear. It sounded bipedal, two-footed. A slow, deliberate patrol around my camp. I sat with my pistol in my hand until dawn, my heart pounding a steady rhythm of fear. The next morning, I found the track. It was about 20 feet from my tent, pressed deep into the soft soil near the creek. It was huge, at least 16 inches long and shaped like a human foot, but broader, thicker. There were 5 distinct toes. I stared at it, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. I'd seen thousands of bear tracks. This wasn't a bear. Bears don't leave single footprints like that. My scientific, rational mind was screaming for an explanation, but my gut knew. My gut knew what the old stories said. I decided to cut my patrol short. I packed up my camp in a hurry, my hands shaking. I just wanted to get back to the ranger station, back to electric lights and other people. We started hiking out, moving much faster than we came in. The woods felt different now, hostile. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was heavy with observation. The encounter happened around midday. I was crossing a narrow, moss-covered log over a ravine. It was slick from the morning dew. My boot slipped. I went down hard, my leg twisting beneath me. A sharp, white-hot pain shot up from my ankle. I tried to stand, but the moment I put weight on it, I collapsed with a cry of pain. My ankle was broken. I was miles from the nearest trail, alone, and injured. Panic set in, cold and sharp. Buddy was barking, licking my face, sensing my distress. I was trying to calm myself down, trying to think when he suddenly went silent. He backed away from me, his tail tucked between his legs, and started growling low in his throat. facing the trees on the other side of the ravine. And then I saw it. It was standing about 50 yards away, partially hidden behind a massive Douglas fir. It was tall, maybe 8 feet, and covered in dark, matted hair. Its shoulders were incredibly broad, its arms long and powerful. It wasn't an animal. It stood like a man, but it was no man I had ever seen. Its face was in shadow, but I could feel its gaze on me. It was just watching. No aggression, no threat, just curiosity. I was frozen. My fear was so total, so absolute, that I couldn't even breathe. My pistol was in its holster, but my arm felt like it was made of lead. All the stories, all the jokes around the campfire, they all came rushing back. But this was real. I was looking at something that shouldn't exist. It took a slow step out from behind the tree. It moved with a strange grace for something so large. It tilted its head slightly as if trying to understand what it was seeing. A broken man and a terrified dog. I could see its face more clearly now. It was more ape-like than human, but the eyes were intelligent. They were dark, deep-set, and filled with a kind of ancient sadness. It took another step. Buddy's growl turned into a terrified whimper. I thought, this is it. This is how I die. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. But nothing happened. When I opened them again, it was still there. It looked at me, then at my twisted ankle, then back at me. It raised one of its massive hands and made a soft sound, a quiet, 2-note whistle. It wasn't threatening. It was almost inquisitive. Then, as silently as it appeared, it turned and walked back into the dense forest, vanishing completely. I never saw it again. I don't know how long I lay there shaking, before I managed to splint my own ankle and begin the long, agonizing crawl back to civilization. But I know this. It saw me. It saw I was helpless, and it chose to walk away. It spared me, and that is the part that has haunted me for 30 years. Not the fear, but the intelligence, the choice. I was nothing more than a wounded animal in its world, and it showed me a mercy. I'm not sure we humans would have shown it. That encounter stripped me of my arrogance. It taught me that we are not the masters of this world. We are just the loudest tenants, and there are older, quieter things living in the shadows. The silence that fell after it left was heavier than any I had ever known. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. The birds were quiet. The wind had died. All I could hear was the frantic pounding of my own heart and the sound of Buddy whining softly, still pressed against the ground. I lay there on the cold, damp earth, my broken ankle throbbing with a rhythm that matched my fear. The pain was a grounding force, the only thing that told me I was still alive, that the last few minutes hadn't been some fever dream brought on by the fall. I didn't move for what felt like an hour. I just stared at the spot where it had vanished, expecting it to reappear at any moment. My mind was a storm of disbelief and terror. I tried to find a logical box to put the experience in. A bear walking on its hind legs? No. The proportions were wrong. The movement too fluid, too human. A man in a costume? Out here? Miles from any trail in terrain this rough? The idea was more absurd than the reality I had just witnessed. The eyes. I kept coming back to the eyes. There was no malice in them, just a deep ancient intelligence and something that felt like recognition. It had looked at me not as a threat, but as another living thing, broken and out of its element. The cold began to seep into my bones, and I knew if I stayed there I wouldn't make it. Panic was a luxury I couldn't afford. I had to move. I used my knife to cut strips from the bottom of my flannel shirt, and gritting my teeth against the waves of pain, I fashioned a crude splint for my ankle using 2 sturdy branches. Every movement was agony. Buddy seemed to understand. He stopped whining and stayed close, nudging my hand with his nose as if offering encouragement. The journey back was the purest definition of hell I have ever experienced. Crawling was my only option. I dragged myself over rocks, through mud, and under thorny bushes. My hands were raw and bleeding within the first hour. My world shrank to the few feet of ground in front of me. The smell of pine, the feeling of damp moss, the sharp sting of a nettle. Every inch was a victory. Every yard was a monumental achievement. The nights were the worst. I'd build a small smoky fire and huddle next to it, my pistol in my hand, my back against a rock. Sleep never came. Every shadow seemed to take its shape. Every snap of a twig made my blood run cold. I wasn't just afraid of bears or cougars anymore. I was afraid of the thing that knew I was there. The thing that had watched me and let me live. Buddy was my sentinel. He never relaxed. staying awake with me, his ears constantly twitching, his low growl a constant reminder that we were not alone. The forest I had loved, the place I considered my true home, had become a hostile, alien landscape. It knew a secret, and now, so did I. On the third day of my crawl, my water ran out. Dehydration set in and my mind started to play tricks on me. I saw movement in the corners of my eyes. I heard whispers in the rustling leaves. I thought about giving up, about just lying down and letting the forest reclaim me. What was the point? I was a ghost already, haunted by something I could never explain. Then Buddy would lick my face, a rough, warm tongue that pulled me back from the edge. He was depending on me. That thought, and that thought alone, kept me going. I finally reached the main trail late on the fourth day. I was delirious, my lips cracked, my body a canvas of cuts and bruises. I remember collapsing at the foot of a trail marker, the carved wood a symbol of a world I no longer felt a part of. A pair of hikers found me an hour later. Their faces were a mixture of shock and pity. At the ranger station, and later at the small town hospital, I told the lie. It was the first time and it came out easier than I expected. I was crossing a ravine. The log was slick and my boot slipped. A stupid mistake. I said it over and over until it started to feel almost true. They asked if I'd seen any bears, if anything had spooked me. No, I said, looking them straight in the eye. Nothing out of the ordinary, just me and my own clumsiness. Each time I said it, I felt a piece of myself hardening. I was building a wall around the memory stone by stone. The doctors set my ankle. The other rangers patted me on the back and called me a tough old dog for getting myself out. They accepted my story without question. Why wouldn't they? It was simple, logical. It fit inside the world they knew. My secret remained mine, locked away in a place no one could ever reach. The physical pain eventually faded. The broken bone healed. But the silence I had chosen, the lie I had told to protect a reality too big for words, became a weight far heavier than any injury. It was a splinter in my soul that I would carry for the rest of my life. I had survived the forest, but I wasn't sure the man who came out was the same one who had gone in. The silence that fell after it left was heavier than any I had ever known. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. The birds were quiet. The wind had died. All I could hear was the frantic pounding of my own heart and the sound of Buddy whining softly, still pressed against the ground. I lay there on the cold, damp earth, my broken ankle throbbing with a rhythm that matched my fear. The pain was a grounding force, the only thing that told me I was still alive, that the last few minutes hadn't been some fever dream brought on by the fall. Life back at the ranger station felt like a performance. I was playing the part of Stanley, the capable, unshakable ranger who had a bit of bad luck. I smiled at the jokes about my clumsiness. I hobbled around on crutches, and I filed my report, a work of fiction that mentioned a slick log and a twisted ankle. There was no mention of the smell, the sound, or the eyes that held 1,000 years of silence. Buddy was different too. He was more subdued, staying closer to me than ever before. Back in our small cabin, he would sometimes lift his head and let out a low whine, staring at the dark tree line beyond our window. He remembered. He was the only other living soul who knew the truth, and he couldn't speak. In a way, that made him the perfect confidant. The first time I went back into the deep woods on patrol after my ankle healed, the fear was a physical thing. It was a cold knot in my stomach and a tightness in my chest. Every shadow was a hiding place. Every gust of wind through the pines sounded like a breath. The forest I had once known as a sanctuary now felt like a cathedral full of ghosts. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, my hand never far from my pistol. I wasn't the same man. The easy confidence was gone, replaced by a brittle vigilance. My old mentor, a ranger named Frank, used to say, "The woods don't keep secrets, Stanley. They just wait for the right person to tell them to." I thought about that a lot. The woods had told me a secret, a profound and terrifying one, and in return I was forced to keep a secret from the world. The irony was bitter. I had become a liar to protect a truth no one would believe. I couldn't risk my career, my reputation, on a story that sounded like madness. So I held it in, and the pressure started to build. Other rangers noticed the change, though they couldn't put a finger on what it was. A fellow ranger, a good man named Charles, cornered me one afternoon while we were cleaning our gear. "You've been jumpy since that fall, Stan," he said, his voice gentle. "Everything okay? You sure you didn't see a cougar out there or something?" I looked him in the eye, the lie coming to my lips like a well-rehearsed line. "Just a new respect for gravity, Charles. Makes a man cautious." He nodded, but I could see in his eyes he didn't fully buy it. He saw the ghost in me, even if he didn't know its name. That conversation was a warning. I had to be a better actor. I had to bury the memory so deep that not even my own eyes could betray me. I started avoiding that section of the park. I'd trade patrols, make excuses. I told myself it was professional caution, but I knew it was fear. I had been shown my place in the order of things. I was not the master of that domain. I was a guest, and a fragile one at that. The creature had shown me mercy, and in doing so, it had asserted a dominance more absolute than any act of aggression could have. It owned that forest, and I was an intruder. One winter evening, about a year after the encounter, I was reading a book by the fire. Buddy was asleep at my feet. A heavy branch, weighed down with snow, snapped off a tree outside with a loud crack. I jumped up so fast I knocked my chair over, my heart hammering against my ribs. My hand flew to my hip, searching for a pistol that wasn't there. Buddy was on his feet in an instant, a deep growl rumbling in his chest, facing the door. We stood there for a full minute, frozen, listening to the silence. It was just the wind, just a branch. But in that moment, the fear was as fresh as it had been on that ravine. The trauma wasn't in the past. It was living inside me, a sleeping beast that could be woken by a single sound. I slowly righted my chair and sat back down, but my hands were shaking. I looked at Buddy, who was still staring at the door, unconvinced. "It's okay, boy," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "It's okay." But I wasn't trying to convince him. I was trying to convince myself. The lie wasn't just for others anymore. It was for me too. A flimsy wall I was trying to hold up against a truth that was immense, ancient, and patient, waiting in the silence of the woods. Life back at the ranger station felt like a performance. I was playing the part of Stanley, the capable, unshakable ranger who had a bit of bad luck. I smiled at the jokes about my clumsiness. I hobbled around on crutches, and I filed my report, a work of fiction that mentioned a slick log and a twisted ankle. There was no mention of the smell, the sound, or the eyes that held 1,000 years of silence. Buddy was different too. He was more subdued, staying closer to me than ever before. Back in our small cabin, he would sometimes lift his head and let out a low whine, staring at the dark tree line beyond our window. He remembered. He was the only other living soul who knew the truth, and he couldn't speak. In a way, that made him the perfect confidant. My old mentor, a ranger named Frank who had skin like tanned leather and eyes that had seen 70 winters in these mountains, used to have a saying. I remember him telling me when I was just a rookie, "The woods don't keep secrets, Stanley. They just wait for the right person to tell them to." I thought about that a lot as I walked those trails. The woods had told me a secret, a profound and terrifying one, and in return I was forced to keep a secret from the world. The irony was bitter. I had become a liar to protect a truth no one would believe. I couldn't risk my career, my reputation, on a story that sounded like madness. So I held it in, and the pressure started to build inside me like water behind a dam. Other rangers noticed the change, though they couldn't put a finger on what it was. A fellow ranger, a good man named Charles, cornered me one afternoon while we were cleaning our gear. He was younger than me, but sharp. "You've been jumpy since that fall, Stan," he said, his voice gentle, trying not to pry too much. "Everything okay? You sure you didn't see a cougar out there or something that spooked you?" I looked him straight in the eye, the lie coming to my lips like a well-rehearsed line from a play I hated. "Just a new respect for gravity, Charles. Makes a man cautious." He nodded, but I could see in his eyes he didn't fully buy it. He saw the ghost in me, even if he didn't know its name. That conversation was a warning. I had to be a better actor. I had to bury the memory so deep that not even my own eyes could betray me. From that day on, I made a point of being the old Stanley, cracking jokes, being the first to volunteer for tough patrols. But it was all a mask. Inside, I was always listening, always watching. I started avoiding that specific section of the park. I'd trade patrols, make excuses about needing to check on equipment or finish paperwork. I told myself it was professional caution, a logical response to a dangerous area where I'd been injured. But I knew it was fear. I had been shown my place in the order of things. I was not the master of that domain. I was a guest, and a fragile one at that. The creature had shown me mercy, and in doing so, it had asserted a dominance more absolute than any act of aggression could have. It owned that forest, and I was an intruder who had been allowed to leave. One winter evening, About a year after the encounter, I was at home reading a book by the fire. Buddy was asleep at my feet, his legs twitching as he dreamed. A heavy branch, weighed down with snow, snapped off a tree outside with a loud, sharp crack. I jumped up so fast I knocked my chair over, my heart hammering against my ribs as if trying to escape. My hand flew to my hip, searching for a pistol that wasn't there. Buddy was on his feet in an instant, a deep growl rumbling in his chest, facing the front door. We stood there for a full minute, frozen, listening to the silence that followed. It was just the wind, just a branch. But in that moment, the fear was as fresh and raw as it had been on that ravine. The trauma wasn't in the past. It was living inside me, a sleeping beast that could be woken by a single, unexpected sound. I slowly righted my chair and sat back down, but my hands were shaking so much I couldn't hold my book. I looked at Buddy, who was still staring at the door, unconvinced. "It's okay, boy," I whispered, my voice hoarse and unfamiliar. "It's okay." But I wasn't trying to convince him, I was trying to convince myself. The lie wasn't just for others anymore, it was for me too. A flimsy wall I was trying to hold up against a truth that was immense, ancient and patient, waiting for me in the silence of the woods. Years began to pile up like fallen leaves, burying that autumn day deeper, but not erasing it. The memory was a root system under the forest floor of my life, out of sight but connected to everything. I did my job. I married a good woman, had a son. I learned to laugh at cookouts and talk about the weather, but a part of me never left that ravine. It was always there, at the edge of my thoughts, a dark shape in the periphery. I became an expert on my own fear. I learned its habits, its triggers, the snap of a twig in a quiet house, the smell of wet earth after a rainstorm, the low, guttural sound of a truck engine idling down the road. Each one was a small electric shock, a reminder. My wife would sometimes catch me staring out the window into the dark woods that bordered our property. "What's on your mind, Stanley?" she'd ask, her voice soft. I'd just shake my head. "Nothing, honey. Just thinking." How could I tell her that I was on patrol in my own mind, constantly watching the tree line for something I prayed I'd never see again? Buddy grew old. His muzzle turned gray. His steps became slower, but his eyes never lost their knowing look. Whenever I'd get that distant, haunted expression, he'd come over and rest his heavy head on my knee, letting out a soft sigh. It was his way of saying, "I know. I was there too." When he passed, a part of the story died with him. I was truly alone with it then, the sole keeper of a secret too heavy for one man. I buried him under the big oak in the backyard, and for a long time, I felt like I had buried my only witness, my only proof that I wasn't crazy. My reputation as a ranger became solid, ironically built on the very caution born from that terror. I was known as the guy who knew the mountains better than anyone, but also respected their power more than anyone. Younger rangers would come to me for advice. "What's the deal with the old northern ridge, Stan?" A rookie named Eric asked me once, pointing to a section on the wall map. "Trail's been closed off for years." The question felt like a physical blow. I turned from the map, forcing a calm expression. "Rock slides," I said, the lie now so polished it slid out effortlessly. "Unstable shale formation up there. We had a geological survey done back in the 90s. It's a death trap. Too much of a liability to keep it open." I tapped the map with my finger. "We rerouted the main trail through here, Swallow Canyon. It's safer." Eric nodded, accepting it without question. "Makes sense. Thanks, Stan." He walked away, and I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The lie had grown. It wasn't just a story about a twisted ankle anymore. It had geological surveys and liability clauses. It had its own file in the cabinet of my mind, thick with fabricated details to protect the one unbelievable truth. I had cordoned off a piece of the national park inside my own head, building a fence of lies around it. As I got older, my avoidance of that part of the forest became a quiet joke among the other rangers. They called it Stanley's Taboo Ridge. They thought it was a superstition, a quirk from an old-timer who'd spent too long in the woods. They didn't understand that it wasn't superstition. It was a treaty. I stayed out of its territory, and it, I hoped, stayed out of mine. But the woods have a long memory. One summer, a small plane went down somewhere in that vast, roadless wilderness. The search area was huge, covering dozens of square miles, and the northern edge of it brushed right up against my forbidden zone. Our chief ranger, a practical man named Robert, who trusted maps more than instincts, unrolled a chart on the hood of his truck. "We're organizing grid searches," he said, his finger tracing a line. Stanley, I want you and your team to take Grid 7. It includes the base of the old ridge. My blood ran cold. I stared at the map, at that familiar, dreaded topography. It felt like a summons. After all these years of careful avoidance, I was being sent back. Robert, I started, my voice tight. That area is difficult. The terrain is treacherous. He looked at me, his expression impatient. We've got a pilot and maybe 2 passengers out there, Stan. We don't have the luxury of difficult. You know that area better than anyone, even if you haven't set foot in it for 20 years. We need your eyes. He was right. My personal ghosts had to be set aside. There were lives at stake. I nodded, my throat dry. You're right. We'll gear up. As I walked away to gather my team, I felt a profound sense of dread settle over me. It felt like I was breaking a silent promise. I was going back to the place where the world had cracked open and shown me something impossible. And I had a terrible feeling that it had been waiting for me. The silence I had kept for so long was about to be tested, not by a confession, but by the forest itself. I was going back to the place where the maps had lied, where my own report had lied, and where a truth as old as the mountains was still breathing in the shadows. We gathered a small team, just 2 other rangers besides me. One was a seasoned guy my age named Jerry, quiet and dependable. The other was a kid fresh out of training, maybe 25, named Kyle. He had that bright-eyed, invincible look I probably had once. He saw this as a heroic rescue mission, a chance to prove himself. He had no idea what he was walking into. He just saw trees. The drive to the northern access point was mostly silent. Jerry drove, his eyes on the winding dirt road. Kyle was in the back, checking his GPS and humming to himself. I just stared out the passenger window, watching the familiar pines blur into a solid green wall. Each mile closer felt like a knot tightening in my stomach. I remembered something an old-timer ranger, a man named Harold, told me when I was just a rookie. We were sitting by a campfire and he was carving a piece of wood. He never looked up when he said it. Some trees have roots that go deeper than the mountain, Stanley. You don't want to know what they hold on to. At the time, I thought he was just being poetic. Now his words felt like a prophecy. We parked the truck where the maintained trail ended. From here on, it was all bushwhacking and old, forgotten paths. I shouldered my pack, the weight familiar but somehow heavier today. It was filled with survival gear, first aid, flares, all the tools of my trade, but they all felt like children's toys against the memory of what lived in these woods. All right, I said, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. We go in pairs from here. Kyle, you're with me. Jerry, you'll work the parallel grid a quarter mile to the east. We maintain radio contact every 30 minutes. No exceptions. If you miss a check-in, we assume the worst and pull back. Kyle gave a sharp nod, his face eager. You got it, Stan. Jerry just looked at me, a long, steady gaze. He'd worked with me for 15 years. He knew about Stanley's taboo ridge. He never asked why I avoided it, but he knew the avoidance was real and deep. He saw something in my face now that made him pause. You sure about this, Stanley? He asked, his voice low. We don't have a choice, I said, and that was the end of it. We started walking. For the first hour, the woods were normal. Sun dappled through the canopy, birds called from the branches, and the air smelled clean and wild. We were walking through the buffer zone, the part of the forest that still played by the rules. But then we came to it. A barely visible path overgrown with ferns and blocked by a long-rotted log that had once been a barrier. A weathered, bullet-scarred sign lay half buried in the dirt. You could just make out the words, "Trail closed. Hazardous conditions." This was the border. This is it, huh? Kyle said, stepping over the log. Looks like nobody's been up here in a long time. Nobody has, I said, my voice tight. The moment I crossed that invisible line, the world changed. It wasn't dramatic, but it was absolute. The bird song stopped. Not faded, but cut off like someone had flipped a switch. The air grew still and heavy, and the sunlight seemed to struggle to reach the forest floor. A deep, profound silence fell over everything. A silence that felt ancient and aware. It was the same silence I remembered from that day. It wasn't an absence of sound. It was a presence. We walked on, our boots crunching on dead leaves, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet. I found myself scanning the trees, my hand resting on the handle of the large hunting knife on my belt. My senses were on fire. Every shadow seemed too deep. Every gust of wind sounded like a whisper. Man, it's creepy up here, Kyle muttered after about 20 minutes, his earlier confidence starting to fray. Feels like I don't know. Like we're in a church or something. Stay close was all I could say. And then I smelled it. It was faint at first, carried on a slight breeze that rustled the treetops but didn't touch us down below. It was a thick, musky odor. A smell of wet fur, rotting meat, and something else. Something acrid and primal that no animal I knew of possessed. It was the smell of the ravine. The smell of my nightmares. I stopped dead in my tracks, my body rigid. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to grab the kid and run, to never look back. "What is it?" Kyle asked, bumping into me. "You see something?" I didn't answer. I just raised my hand, signaling for silence. I slowly scanned the dense woods around us. The smell was stronger now, coming from somewhere up ahead, deeper in the shadows of the ridge. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. It knew we weren't alone. After all these years, I had broken the treaty. I had come back to its territory, and it was here, waiting. The forest was finally ready to collect its debt. My blood ran cold. It was the exact same smell. 30 years vanished in an instant, and I was a young man again, paralyzed by that same primal scent while my dog whined at my feet. This time there was no dog, only a kid whose life was now in my hands. My past was reaching out from the shadows to claim a new victim, and I had led him right to it. "What is that smell?" Kyle whispered, his nose wrinkled in disgust. "Did something die around here?" "We're leaving," I said, my voice a low, urgent rasp. I grabbed his shoulder, my grip much tighter than I intended. "Now, slowly, turn around and walk back the way we came. No sudden moves." He tried to pull away. "What? No way. We just got here. I want to see what's making that stink." "No, you don't," I hissed, turning him bodily. My knuckles were white where I gripped his jacket. "You're going to listen to me for once in your life. You will turn around, you will not run, and you will not make a sound. Do you understand me?" The fear in my own voice must have finally gotten through to him. His bravado evaporated, replaced by wide-eyed confusion and a flicker of genuine terror. He nodded, his mouth suddenly dry. We started backing away, step by agonizing step. I kept my eyes scanning the dense undergrowth ahead, the direction the smell was coming from. I was trying to retrace our path without turning my back on the threat. Every snapped twig under our boots sounded like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. The air was thick, suffocating. It felt like moving through water. We had retreated maybe 50 feet when a sound split the air. It wasn't a roar or a growl. It was a deep, guttural pop, like a giant cracking its knuckles, followed by a sharp crack of wood. Then a shadow passed over us. For a split second I thought it was a bird, but it was too big, too fast. It was followed by a tremendous crash just ahead of us, no more than 20 yards away. A tree limb as thick as my thigh and at least 15 feet long had been driven into the soft forest floor like a spear. It had been snapped clean off a massive Douglas fir 100 feet up the ridge and thrown with impossible force. It wasn't a random event, it was a message, a warning, the same kind of warning I had ignored all those years ago. Kyle let out a strangled gasp and stumbled backwards, tripping over a root. He fell hard. What was that? What the hell was that? He scrambled on the ground, his eyes locked on the branch sticking out of the earth. "Get up," I ordered, grabbing his arm and hauling him to his feet. "Get up and keep moving, don't look at it." But it was too late. The spell of the silent hunt was broken by his fall and his panicked shout. From the deep woods in front of us, an answer came. It was a sound I had only heard once before, a sound the human throat was not designed to make. It started as a low rumble, a vibration I felt in the bones of my feet before I heard it with my ears. It grew into a long, mournful, and utterly terrifying howl that was part roar, part scream. It wasn't a sound of simple aggression. It was filled with rage, with intelligence, with something that sounded like sorrow. It echoed through the silent trees, a sound of absolute power and dominion. This was its home. We were invaders. That's when Kyle broke. He shoved me away and started to run, crashing blindly back the way we came. "No!" I screamed, the sound swallowed by the forest. "Don't run!" I knew what happened when you ran. Running triggers the chase. It marks you as prey. I took off after him, my old legs pumping, my lungs burning. The forest exploded with noise around us. Whatever was out there was moving too, keeping pace with us just inside the tree line. I couldn't see it, but I could hear it. It was the sound of immense weight moving with impossible speed. It wasn't the sound of footsteps. It was the sound of the forest itself being pushed aside. Branches snapped, bushes were flattened. It was like a freight train was tearing through the woods right beside us. I tackled Kyle, bringing us both down in a heap of dead leaves and dirt. I threw myself on top of him, covering his mouth with my hand. "Be quiet," I panted, my heart hammering against my ribs. "For the love of God, be quiet." He struggled beneath me, his eyes wild with a terror I knew all too well. I held him down, my face pressed into the damp earth, listening. The crashing sound stopped. The forest fell silent once more. But it wasn't the peaceful silence from before. This was a listening silence, a waiting silence. The smell was overwhelming now, a thick, musky cloud that clung to everything. It was watching us. I knew it was. Probably just yards away, hidden in the deep shadows between the ancient trees. It was deciding what to do with us. It was remembering me. The debt, I thought, my mind reeling. It's here to collect the debt. My mind was a whirlwind of pure, primal fear. Every instinct I had, honed over 30 years in these woods, was screaming at me. Stay down. Don't breathe. Don't exist. I could feel Kyle trembling under me, his muffled sobs vibrating through my chest. I pressed him harder into the dirt, trying to make us one with the forest floor. A lump of shadow that wasn't worth noticing. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The only sounds were the frantic drumming of my own heart and the whisper of the wind high up in the canopy. The musky, wet animal smell was so strong it was like a physical weight in the air, coating my tongue and burning my nostrils. It was close. So close I imagined I could feel the heat radiating from its body. Then, a sound. It wasn't a roar or a snap. It was the soft, deliberate sound of a heavy foot pressing into the damp earth, a squelch of mud and crushed leaves. Then another. It was walking, slowly, circling us. I squeezed my eyes shut, a useless gesture against a threat that didn't care if I could see it. I pictured it in my mind, a towering shadow moving with a quiet confidence that was more terrifying than any charge. It knew we were there. It knew we were helpless. This wasn't a hunt. This was an inspection. I felt a hot tear slide down my temple and into the dirt. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of sheer, unadulterated terror. The kind of fear that dissolves your sense of self, that turns you back into a child hiding under the covers. The memory of Buddy, my brave dog, whimpering and clawing at the cabin door all those years ago, flashed in my mind. He had understood this feeling. He had known what was outside. Another footstep, closer this time. I could hear a low sound now, a series of deep guttural clicks and chuffs, almost like it was talking to itself. A questioning sound. It was assessing us, deciding. The part of my brain that was still a ranger was trying to analyze it, to categorize it, but there was no category. It was something ancient and unknown, and it was the absolute master of this domain. Kyle started to struggle again, a desperate, silent thrashing. His terror was boiling over. I shifted my weight, pinning his arms with my knees. My hand clamped so tightly over his mouth that I could feel his teeth against my palm. "Still," I mouthed into his ear, my own voice a dry rasp I couldn't even hear. "Be still." Then the footsteps stopped. They were to our left, maybe 30 feet away, just beyond a thicket of ferns. The silence that followed was worse than the sounds. It was a heavy, expectant silence. I held my breath until my lungs burned. What was it doing? Was it watching? Was it preparing to rush us? A new sound broke the stillness, a soft, tearing noise followed by a gentle thump, then another, and another. It was methodical, rhythmic. What was it doing? My mind raced through possibilities. Was it tearing a log apart? Digging for something? The sounds were too controlled for that, too precise. After maybe a dozen of these soft thumps, the footsteps resumed, but this time they were moving away. The same slow, deliberate pace. Each step was a release of pressure in my chest. The sound grew fainter and fainter until it was swallowed by the immense silence of the forest once more. The overpowering smell began to fade, slowly carried away by the breeze. We lay there, motionless, for what felt like an hour. I didn't dare move a muscle. Kyle had gone completely limp beneath me, either from exhaustion or from fainting from fear. I listened, straining my ears for any hint that it was still there, playing a trick. But there was nothing. Only the normal, indifferent sounds of the woods beginning to tentatively return. A distant bird call, the rustle of a mouse in the undergrowth. Finally, when I was sure it was gone, I slowly, carefully pushed myself up. My limbs were stiff and shaking, my body drenched in a cold sweat. Kyle lay curled in a ball, his face buried in his arms, shivering uncontrollably. "It's gone," I whispered, my voice cracking. "It's gone." He didn't respond. I looked in the direction the creature had been. My eyes scanned the dark woods, searching for any sign. And then I saw it. In the small clearing about 30 feet away was a line. A perfectly straight line drawn in the dirt, marked by a series of stones. They weren't random rocks. They were small, flat, gray river stones, each about the size of my palm. There were 10 of them, placed neatly, end to end, forming a barrier between us and the deeper woods. Where had it gotten them? The nearest creek was half a mile away. It hadn't been tearing a log apart. It had been taking stones from a pouch from somewhere on its person and placing them on the ground, one by one, deliberately. My blood ran cold. This wasn't an animal marking its territory. This was an intelligence I couldn't comprehend. It wasn't just a warning like the thrown branch. This was different. This was a boundary, a line drawn. It was a statement. "You do not cross this. I have let you live. Do not make me regret it." The debt. It hadn't come to collect. It had come to renegotiate the terms. It was reminding me of the pact I didn't even know I had made all those years ago when it spared me the first time. I had stayed away. I had kept it secret. But by bringing Kyle here, by being careless, I had broken the unspoken rules. This was my final warning. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that there would not be another. I knelt beside Kyle, gently shaking his shoulder. "Kyle, we have to go. Now." He didn't move. He just kept shivering, his face pressed into the damp leaves, making small, wounded noises like a trapped animal. I had to get him up. We couldn't stay here. Being this close to that line of stones felt like standing on the edge of a cliff in the dark. I hooked my arms under his and hauled him to his feet. He was dead weight, his legs buckling. I had to half carry, half drag him away from that clearing. I didn't dare look back at the line of stones, but I could feel it there, a silent judgment on my carelessness. I had trespassed in a way I couldn't take back. Our retreat was agonizingly slow. I kept Kyle leaning against me, his arm draped over my shoulders. Every snapped twig under my boots sounded like a gunshot in the heavy silence. The forest didn't feel like my home anymore. It felt alien, hostile. The familiar shadows of the Douglas firs seemed to twist into watching shapes. The wind whispering through the canopy sounded like a voice I couldn't quite make out. I felt watched from every direction, not by the creature itself, but by the forest. It was as if the woods were its accomplice, and I was no longer welcome. Kyle started muttering, his voice a hoarse whisper. "The eyes. Oh God, the eyes." He repeated it over and over. He hadn't seen its face, I knew that. He was seeing it in his mind, his terror filling in the blanks with something worse than reality. What could I tell him? That it was a bear? A cougar? No animal drew a line in the dirt with river stones. Telling him a lie would be an insult to the horror we had just survived. Telling him the truth was impossible. We stumbled on through the twilight. I didn't use my flashlight. I didn't want to draw any attention. We used the fading light of the sky, moving from tree to tree like fugitives. My mind was a storm. 30 years of ranger training, of logic, of understanding the natural world, had been shattered in a single afternoon. I was dealing with something that had rules, that had intelligence, that had shown mercy? No, not mercy. It was a stay of execution. A warning shot delivered with stones instead of bullets. The debt. What was the debt? Sparing my life all those years ago? Was that the deal? I stay out of its way and it stays out of mine? It seemed so simple, yet I had broken it without even knowing. I had brought this boy, this tourist, into a place he never should have been. I had endangered him, and in doing so, I had endangered myself. The creature's message was clear. My life was forfeit if I ever made that mistake again. And Kyle, what about him? Was he now part of this unspoken pact? Was he marked? We finally made it back to our campsite just after full dark. The fire had died down to glowing embers. Buddy was hiding under the flap of the tent, whining softly. He wouldn't come out, not even when I called his name. He knew. He understood better than I did. I pushed Kyle into the tent and zipped it shut. He immediately curled into a ball in his sleeping bag, still shivering. I didn't try to talk to him. There were no words. I sat by the embers of the fire, my rifle across my lap, and listened to the night. But I wasn't listening for threats anymore. I was listening for absence. The complete and total lack of that heavy footstep, of that overpowering smell. The silence was my only comfort. I knew then that my life had been split in two. The life before the line of stones, and the life after. I had to get Kyle out of these mountains and back to civilization. I had to make him forget, or at least try to. And I had to file a report. What would I write? Encountered an aggressive, unidentified animal. Subject experienced a panic attack due to wildlife. Every option felt like a profound lie, a betrayal of what had happened. But the biggest question hammering in my skull was this. The creature had drawn a line, a boundary. But where did that boundary end? Was it just that clearing? Or was it the whole forest? Had I just been banished from the very place I had dedicated my life to protecting? The thought was colder and more terrifying than the creature itself. I looked out into the impenetrable darkness, the vast wilderness stretching for hundreds of miles around me. I was a ranger who could no longer walk freely in his own park. I was a man with a secret that would eat him alive, a secret I could never ever tell. The weight of it settled on me heavier than any stone. The night was the longest of my life. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat there, a statue carved from fear, my back against a cold log, watching the embers of the fire die one by one like fading stars. Every gust of wind sounded like it was testing the tree line, checking to see if we had obeyed. Every hoot of an owl felt like a report being sent back to a silent commander in the darkness. The forest, my sanctuary for a decade, had become a prison cell, and I was the warden and the prisoner all at once. Inside the tent, Kyle whimpered in his sleep. Broken sounds. He was still there, in that clearing, facing the thing he couldn't see. I wondered if he would ever truly leave. I had done this to him. My arrogance, my belief that I owned these woods, had led him into the heart of something ancient and territorial. My carelessness had put his sanity on a razor's edge. The guilt was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe the cold, pine-scented air. Buddy never left the tent. A few times, I heard him shift, a low whine escaping his throat, but he wouldn't show his face. That was worse than any sound the forest could make. Buddy had faced down bears and cornered cougars without flinching. To see him so utterly broken by fear confirmed what I already knew in my soul. We had brushed up against a power that didn't follow the rules of nature I understood. It made its own. At the first hint of dawn, a faint gray light that seemed to struggle through the thick canopy, I started moving. My limbs were stiff, my mind foggy with exhaustion, but adrenaline was a harsh master. I had one goal: get Kyle to the truck. I moved with a stealth I hadn't used in years, packing our gear without a single metallic clank. I rolled up Kyle's sleeping bag with him still in it, gently shaking him awake. His eyes flew open, wide and vacant. "Is it gone?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "It's gone," I lied. It wasn't a lie to comfort him, but a lie to command myself. If I said it, maybe I could believe it long enough to function. "We're leaving right now." He didn't argue. He moved like an old man, his joints creaking. He wouldn't look anywhere but at the ground directly in front of his feet. As I stomped out the last of the embers and scattered the ashes, I felt it again. That pressure. The sensation of being watched not by a pair of eyes but by the entire forest. The bark on the trees seemed like skin, the hanging moss like hair. The woods were alive, and they were aware of us, and they wanted us gone. The hike back to the ranger truck was supposed to take 6 hours. It felt like 6 years. I took point, my rifle held at a low ready, not because I thought I could use it, but because holding it was the only thing keeping my hands from shaking uncontrollably. Kyle stumbled behind me, his eyes still glued to the trail. Buddy was a nervous shadow at my heels, his tail tucked so far between his legs it was a wonder he could walk. He never once ranged ahead, never once barked at a squirrel. He was a different dog. We were all different. We didn't talk. The silence was a living entity between us, filled with the things we couldn't say. How could I explain to him what we saw? How could I tell a senior ranger back at the station that I'd abandoned my patrol route because a creature drew a line with stones? They'd send me for a psych evaluation. My career, the only thing I had ever wanted, would be over. But my career was already over. I just didn't know it yet. I could never walk these trails again without looking over my shoulder, without feeling that invisible boundary humming just out of sight. The creature hadn't just claimed a piece of the forest. It had claimed a piece of my mind. It had drawn a line through my life, and I would forever be on the wrong side of it. About a mile from the trailhead, Kyle stopped dead. He was staring into the trees to our right. "What is that?" he breathed. My heart seized in my chest. I slowly raised my rifle, following his gaze. I saw nothing but the dense undergrowth, the dark trunks of hemlocks. "What do you see, Kyle?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "The smell," he said, his nostrils flaring. "It's here. It's watching us." I couldn't smell it. My senses were overloaded, numb with fear. But I believed him. I grabbed his arm. "Don't look. Just walk. We're almost there. Just keep walking," I urged, pulling him along. We moved faster, half jogging the rest of the way, the imagined weight of its gaze pressing down on us like a physical force. When the dull metal of my Ranger truck finally appeared through the trees, I almost collapsed with relief. It was a piece of the other world, the human world, a world of engines and paved roads and rules that made sense. Safety. I unlocked the doors and practically shoved Kyle into the passenger seat. He curled up, his face against the window, staring back into the woods. Buddy leaped into the back seat and immediately hid on the floor. I threw our packs in the bed of the truck, my hands fumbling with the keys as I tried to get them into the ignition. The engine turning over was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I slammed the truck into drive and peeled out of the dirt parking area, sending gravel flying. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't dare. I drove for 20 minutes at a speed that was reckless for those winding mountain roads before I allowed myself to slow down, before my heart stopped trying to beat its way out of my ribcage. I glanced over at Kyle. He was still looking out the window, but his eyes weren't vacant anymore. They were filled with a kind of haunted understanding. "You knew," he said, his voice flat. "You knew it was out there before. This wasn't your first time." It wasn't a question, it was an accusation, and he was right. The debt. I hadn't paid it. I had just passed it on to him. I nodded slowly, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. "I saw something years ago," I admitted, my voice a dry rasp. "A track. A shadow. Nothing like this. I thought I was imagining it. Maybe I wanted someone else to see it too, so I wouldn't feel like I was going crazy." The words tasted like ash in my mouth. It was a pathetic, selfish excuse, and we both knew it. I wasn't trying to confirm my sanity. I was trying to share the burden of a terror that was too heavy for one man to carry alone. And in doing so, I had broken him. Kyle didn't respond. He just turned back to the window and we drove the rest of the way in a silence that was heavier than any forest. It was the silence of a shared trauma, a secret that would now bind us together forever, whether we wanted it to or not. Back at the station, the fluorescent lights felt harsh and sterile. The smell of coffee and paperwork was an alien scent after days in the wild. A couple of the other Rangers were there, laughing over a card game. They looked up when we came in. "Hey, you're back early," one of them, a guy named Wayne, said with a grin. "Bear chase you out?" I saw Kyle flinch. I forced a weak smile. "Something like that. Got turned around in the fog up on Ridgeback. Figured it was better to call it a day." It was a weak lie, but it was plausible. No one questioned it. They went back to their game and the human world closed around us again, oblivious and safe. We filled out the patrol report in silence at a shared desk. Under the section for unusual observations, I wrote NA. I pushed the form over to Kyle for his signature. He looked at the blank space for a long moment, his pen hovering over the paper. I could feel his entire future balancing on the tip of that pen. He could have written the truth. He could have destroyed us both. Instead, he signed his name, his hand moving in a stiff, robotic motion. He slid the report back to me without a word, stood up, and walked out of the station. I watched him go, the screen door slamming shut behind him with a sound that felt like a final judgment. That was the last time I ever spoke to Kyle. He put in for a transfer the next day. A week later, he was gone. I heard through the grapevine a few months later that he'd quit the service entirely, went back to some city in the Midwest and took a desk job. They said he couldn't handle the isolation of the woods, but I knew the truth. It wasn't the isolation he couldn't handle. It was the company. I stayed a ranger for another 25 years. I was good at my job. I knew the trails, the weather, the animals. I earned promotions, respect, but I was a fraud. I was a man who patrolled a kingdom whose true ruler I had met, and whose boundaries I now respected with a primal fear. I never went back to that northern sector. Never. If a call came from that area, I'd find an excuse to send someone else. I couldn't bring myself to cross that line of stones again, not even in my memory. The forest was never the same for me. The comforting silence I had once loved now felt watchful. Every snapped twig was a footstep. Every shadow was a shape. Buddy felt it too. He was never the same dog after that trip. He stayed closer to me on patrol, and he'd sometimes wake up in the night, a low growl rumbling in his chest for no reason at all. He lived to be a ripe old age, but the wild, fearless spark in his eyes was gone. I had gotten him out of the woods, but I don't think the woods ever truly got out of him. So why am I telling this now? Because Kyle deserves the truth to be told. Because what we saw was real. I don't know what it was. A lost species? Something ancient? Something else? I don't pretend to have the answers. All I know is that it exists, and it wants to be left alone. It draws a line and expects you to have the good sense not to cross it. I crossed it. First, by ignoring the signs all those years ago, and then by dragging an innocent young man with me to pay for my arrogance. The creature in the woods never laid a hand on me, but it took my career, my peace of mind, and it took that poor kid's future. It drew a line through my life, and the guilt I feel for what happened to Kyle has been my side of the boundary ever since. I've lived on this side of the line for 30 years. Maybe telling this story is my way of finally trying to step back over it. Or maybe it's just an old man's confession before the silence takes him for good.